Malian lawmaker Mamadou Hawa Gassama just got hit with a 3-year prison sentence in Côte d'Ivoire, and it's all because he did not hold back his opinions online. Now, he called the 84-year-old President Alassane Ouattara a tyrant and an enemy of Mali in various interviews and social media posts. While his lawyer is calling the sentence excessive, Côte d'Ivoire prosecutors are not budging. They're arguing that his words were not just political critiques, they were a deliberate attempt to stir up trouble and undermine the government. Now, this whole mess is really a symptom of the bad blood between the two neighbors that's been brewing since Mali's military coup in 2020. They're basically on opposite sides of the geopolitical fence. So Côte d'Ivoire is a staunch ally of France, while Mali's junta has kicked out French forces in favor of Russian support. Now, this jailing feels like the latest round of tit-for-tat after Mali imprisoned dozens of Ivorian soldiers a couple of years ago. It's a classic case of a lone politician getting caught in the crossfire of a much bigger diplomatic feud. Now, joining us on this conversation, we have Paul Merley. He is a consulting fellow, Africa program in Chatham House. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time and for speaking, or for joining us to speak on this.
Well, I think you've got it in one. It really is a case of a lone politician, a single politician who was being rather outspoken, but caught in the fact that the relationship between Mali and Côte d'Ivoire has become so embittered, and more broadly, the relationship between the three Sahel states under military rule, so Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, and Côte d'Ivoire, have become so embittered. And I think in some ways you could say, especially with the severity of the sentence, because the actual facts of the case are not disputed. Mr. Gassama has completely admitted saying what he says. He doesn't deny any of the facts. So in a sense, well, the really interesting bit is the severity of the sentence, and this heavy prison term and fine are a sign, if you like, I think in some ways, of the institutions of the Côte d'Ivoire state being frustrated with the fact that for the last several years, since the military coups in the Sahel, which of course then later led to the Sahel countries under the military regimes pulling out of ECOWAS, the West African bloc, relations have been very embittered, and there's been a lot of invective from the Sahelian countries and from social media accounts, often originating in those countries, targeting ECOWAS, but particularly certain member states of ECOWAS. And I suppose the two that are most targeted in this war of social media and media comment and diplomatic criticism tend to be Benin and Côte d'Ivoire, which, as you said, are both close allies of France.
All right.
And so, in a sense, Mr. Gassama is paying the price, if you like, of this very bitter situation. And whether he actually ends up serving the sentence or most of it, of course, remains to be seen. But it's interesting that since he was arrested in the middle of last year, while he was on a family visit to Côte d'Ivoire, because like many Malians, he has family on both sides of the border, he's actually been held in detention. He wasn't released on bail, granted conditional release until the trial.
Well, some would actually disagree with you, given that Ouattara is currently serving a controversial 4th term, violating what many originally saw as a 2-term limit. Is the Ivorian state not proving Gassama's point by jailing him for that very criticism?
Well, I'm not so sure that it's really about that. Although he's made criticisms, after all, he's coming from a country which is currently under military rule, where all the previous constitutional institutions have in effect been suspended. There are no elected institutions. And so I think the fact that he has made criticisms of Mr. Ouattara's role as president and what's happening in Côte d'Ivoire itself, which, as you say, is very controversial among many Ivorians, I think doesn't necessarily. Many Ivorians might feel that even if his criticisms are valid, he isn't really the person who should be making them. But on the other hand, of course, we have the fact that ECOWAS is in principle committed to the protocol of democracy and good governance, free speech, and so this case very much falls on that very fine line as to whether it's exercising free speech or whether in some way it's some sort of form of incitement. And we've seen other cases in other countries in the region where people have, for example, Ousmane Sonko, now Prime Minister of Senegal, was under the previous government in Senegal, he was convicted of criminal libel for making criticisms of a minister in the former government. And yet Senegal, of course, also has a proud tradition of free speech, and many people will have felt that he was exercising his right to free and open comment. So I think at the heart of this is the fact that Côte d'Ivoire also feels that it has been unfairly targeted by the Sahelian regimes and the media and the social media criticisms that are coming from them. So just a day or two ago, the president of Niger, General Tiani, accused Côte d'Ivoire of being behind one of the actors behind the attack on Niamey Airport.
In Niger, yeah.
And earlier in late January, the Burkina government said that the failed coup attempt that happened on the 3rd, 4th of January in Burkina Faso said that was financed with money from Côte d'Ivoire. So I think the Ivorians feel that they have been, as it were, targeted with all sorts of accusations. And the case of the soldiers who, I think it was 39 Ivorian soldiers who were sent in 2022 under a long-standing arrangement to provide security protection for the warehouses of the UN peacekeeping force that was in Mali at the time. And there was some sort of error in their paperwork, and Mali then accused them of arriving to try and stage a coup. And 46 of those soldiers were held for 6 months in detention, at one point threatened with trial.
49 of them.
So there's a heap of grievances on all sides, and I think this case is caught up in all that.
Okay, now, by the way, it was 49 Ivorian soldiers. But then Gassama is a sitting member of Mali's transitional parliament. Does this arrest not set a dangerous regional precedent where, a diplomatic immunity is now effectively dead in West Africa?
I think the fact that he's a member of the transitional parliament is troubling, because parliamentary systems, and even those where you have a transition regime and the parliament is nominated and not elected, obviously the political functioning of political life requires that parliamentarians enjoy a certain degree of respect, a certain freedom to comment and travel within the region. And at the time when the events happened, when Mr. Gassama made his comments, Mali was still in ECOWAS. So obviously now Mali, like Niger and Burkina, has left and is in the AES Sahel bloc. But at the time, he was, as it were, a fellow West African ECOWAS parliamentarian. So that does set a troubling precedent.
All right, Paul, just before you go ahead, I apologize. Just before you go ahead, we need to go on a quick commercial break, and we will be back. Thank you so much. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. We're actually about wrapping up this segment. We're talking about the Malian parliamentarian Gassama that was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison by President Ouattara, president of Cote d'Ivoire. And we still have Paul Meli with us. Paul, just before we wrap up, would love to have your final thoughts. You know, we did talk about how in 2022, Mali sentenced 49 Ivorian soldiers to 20 years for undermining state security. Would you say that this 3-year sentence for Gassama is less about insults and more about Abidjan finally balancing the ledger for that humiliation?
Certainly an element of that. And I think the other factor is, and you hinted at it in your question just before the break, that essentially the consensus that there was across West Africa over a basic level of, should we say, governance and constitutional norms and how countries dealt with each other and what it was legitimate to either do or say about events in other countries, and the way that ECOWAS had a sort of a shared regional approach to crisis management, and people tried to resolve crises through negotiation and disputes and in a relatively calm manner. That, under the pressure of all the regional security crisis and the coups and the various political constitutional changes in some of the coastal ECOWAS states, all that consensus has really broken down. And so something that was one of West Africa's great strengths, a certain culture of how to manage political disputes and try and solve regional issues through negotiation and dialogue, that's a really severely, you can't say completely collapsed, but it's substantially disintegrated. And that, in that sort of context, it's really difficult to avoid these very bitter disputes, just as we've seen between Niger and Benin over Niger's decision to keep the border closed and accusing Benin of harbouring French troops who might invade Niger, etc. This climate of bitter mistrust is really difficult. And yet this is a time when the region really has huge, very pressing problems to tackle. Let's not forget that in southern Mali, jihadist groups have been basically attacking fuel tankers on the main highways from Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire and from Dakar in Senegal. The security situation is very fragile, and there are huge regional problems to tackle together. But at the moment, with this sort of breakdown of, shall we say, the spirit of diplomatic compromise and a sense that everybody in the region works together to try and resolve difficult issues, that's the very troubling background context to what's happened in this case.
Okay. Well, I wish we had more time to speak on this, but we would have to wrap up here. Thank you so much, Paul Meli, Consulting Fellow, Africa Program, Chatham House. Thank you.